Hey guys, and welcome to Property News Update. I'm Alegre-Wood, and today I'm going to cover the UK budget 2013. So what I want to do is, look, I'm not interested in giving you a line-by-line detail of the budget, because to be fair, for most of you guys out there, a lot of the stuff is not going to directly impact you, and certainly for our overseas investors, a lot of the stuff means nothing really. What I want to more get to is the core of what it means to us as property investors, and really, I mean, that's what it's all about. Is this going to stimulate property prices? Is it going to help rentals? Is it going to help, more properties being produced? What's going to happen in the long term? So they're the sort of things that, these budgets are mainly used for. Yes, okay, it means a lot to, individual people who are receiving the individual things on the line-by-line detail, but the reality is, as a property investor, you want to sort of look at the whole view of things. And look, the good thing is, and just sort of summarise, is that it's good news, okay? It's all good news. There's nothing negative that come out of the budget for property investors. And if anything, and this is one of the things, I was reading one of the articles, and the article basically says, it's now seen as vital for recovery. And they're talking about the property market. And I'm sitting there going, I've been saying this for, a long, long time. Certainly since the start of the recession. The first thing I said was stimulate the housing market, because one of the things you'll realise very quickly is that if you stimulate, especially the new build, because one of the things we're going to talk about today, they're specific to the new build property market, okay? The benefits of these things, the billions of pounds that are being invested, are not going to go to secondary market, they're going to go to new build. Why do they do that? And it's a really good question. It's something you really should understand. The reason it goes to new build is because when you have a plot of land that needs to be built, you bring plumbers, you bring carpenters, you build, everything. And what happens is that money gets put into there, and then what happens is it flows out through the economy. Whereas when it's a secondary market, if you stimulate that market, it goes to the person that owns the home. And then they choose to either save it or they choose to go and put it somewhere else. Now the good thing about putting it into a new home is that it gets put through the whole economy. And that is why they target new build. And it's one of the reasons why I love new build too. Because of that specific reason. When you have a failing economy or a economy in recession or a downturn, they tend to stimulate it. Not straight away. I mean, it would be great if governments did that sort of stuff straight away, but we're now talking 5 years down the track. And they've had the right to buy, the first buy, they've now got help to buy. So they've got a whole heap of schemes that they've been introducing over the last few years. So let's get into it, because really there's two things that you need to be aware of in the budget, and pretty much everything else, and there's a third one. In fact, I'll cover the third one really quickly. They're putting $3 billion into infrastructure, okay? $3 billion in infrastructure, it's not a huge amount, but at least they're spending something. That's the roads, the bridges, all those sort of things, okay? Because they are needed, because if that degrades too far, like we're seeing in America, then that can have serious repercussions on property prices, okay? So it's good they're doing that. The two main things that you need to be aware of is first, $3.5 billion into a shared equity scheme. Now what a shared equity scheme is, and let me just show you this infographic, okay? Because this sort of explains it. It's straight from the government, and it basically says, look, help to buy equity loans. So what it is, it's new build only. You have to come up with 5% deposit, and I am 100% behind people coming up with at least 5% of the deposit, okay? And effectively what happens is, if it's a £200,000 house, they have to find 10 grand. The government will then lend 20% of that amount. So they've got 20% here. So you come up with 10%, they come up with 20 effectively, and this is an interest-free for 5 years, effectively loan, okay? And then the mortgage company will give you a 75%, okay, mortgage at whatever their rate is, all right? Now the great thing about this is effectively you now get in for low money. What this does, and this is for properties up to £600,000, it's available for 3 years, there's $3.5 billion available. Now, what the headline doesn't say, as always, is there's a 1.75% fee, okay, on that money, okay, per year. So effectively, there is a fee on it, but it's interest free. So it is great. Make no mistake, it is a great stimulus. It will attract people, but remember, it's owner occupiers. So if you're sitting overseas and you think, great, I'm going to buy another UK property, it ain't going to happen, because you've got to be owner occupied, and have that. And I haven't found where it says if you can own other property. it is for buying new homes, but it is also for upgrading. So the potential is you may be able to own another property and advantage that. So for some of our UK investors, that could be beneficial. The second side of it is there's £130 billion of mortgage guarantee money. Now, that's a big number, £130 billion. But ignore the number because it's not going to cost the government anywhere near that. That's the grossed up figure. That's the new mortgage lending that can go out there based on what will happen. So effectively what they're doing is you still have to find 5%. They will then guarantee another effectively 20% of that mortgage, and then you get the rest of the mortgage. So what it means is effectively you can go out there and you can find a house and you don't have to worry. It's as if you're borrowing at the 75% mark rather than borrowing at the 95% mark. So that's going to save you some money. The only way the government pays up money is if you default on the mortgage and they have to repossess. And then what happens is the lender, okay, because that's who's benefiting from this, not you as an investor, okay, the lender will then go to the bank, the government and say, hey, pay up on your promise, okay? So that's important, all right? And actually that is a really good thing. Now, stepping away from that, because they're the two things. Apart from that, there's not really much else. The other things you need to be aware of is the deficit, okay? They're still running a deficit. They're borrowing £61 billion over the next 6 months. So if you talk in household terms, that means you as a household and the government as a household is borrowing more than it earns, okay? And it's still doing that. Now, this is normally expected during a recession because what happens is there's more people unemployed, businesses aren't making as much money, so revenue drops, but a lot of the costs that the government have in welfare and hospitals and all those sort of things still remains the same. So you would expect the government to borrow more during a recession or downturn. But what you want to see is that when the boom time comes, that they're actually putting money away and they're running a surplus. Unfortunately, most westernised governments aren't doing that because their welfare systems, their hospital systems and all that sort of thing. Okay, now the other side of it, so that's a deficit. We're still running a deficit. And the problem with that is that you've then got to, if you're borrowing more, obviously that can devalue the pound, which we'll talk about in a second. Growth. What they're looking at growth, 2013, 0.6%, 2014, 1.8, 2.3, 15, and 2.7 in 16. So, as always, these figures, they put them out there and then they tend to review them downwards. The Office of Budget Responsibility, which is that independent agency effectively, is the one that's looking after that. But the fact is, and this is the important bit for you guys, forget the figures because the figures mean nothing. They'll be reviewed, they'll be downvalued, upgrade, whatever. The fact is we are heading out of this recession. It has been it has been the longest recession. It's been deeper and longer than the actual Great Depression. If you look at the economic downturn and things like that, it's been worse. Okay, so make no mistake, this has been a doozer. And there's no doubt about that. The other side is wages. They're predicting wages growth. 1.4, 2.7, 3.6. The good thing with that is that as wages increase, house prices can increase as well. The problem is if you've got wages decreasing and house prices increasing, the likelihood is that's going to rein in the house prices. So that's good news there too. So everything is pointing in the right direction. And sort of talking about a few things. So I'll mention the pound first. So the pound. And this is more for our international investors, this section, because if you're living in the UK, you're borrowing in pounds, all that sort of stuff, it's not going to affect you. Not very much, okay? But if you're internationally, the likelihood is, because they're still running a deficit, because there's still more quantitative easing they're talking about, interest rates are very low, there's no emphasis on the pound actually increasing. And to a degree, in a recession, you don't want your currency to increase too much. Because if it increases, your exports become expensive, your imports, become cheaper. But effectively, what it means is that, that's not getting the wheels turning. By devaluing your currency, the great thing is that you can export more, which stimulates your economy. So that's good news. But as an investor, what that means is the pound is likely to drop further, and I don't think very much. I think interest rates aren't going to drop that much. The economy is getting better, so that's likely to actually stabilise it a bit more. You've still got the European things going on, so that's still destabilising a bit. But I think really the pound, will decrease a little bit, but sort of hold where it is now. I don't think it's going to drop dramatically. So that's good news. depending on what your individual currency is that you're buying in, so if you're buying in Sing dollar, Aussie dollar, ringgit, Hong Kong dollar, whatever, depending on what your individual currency is doing will depend on how that affects you, okay? But the good thing is I think the pound has pretty much bottomed out now. I don't think it's likely to go too much further. I think realistically, the economy has stabilised now, and now it's that slow crawl out, and unfortunately it's not one of these V recessions or downturns. It is a slow crawl out, and that's why I'm talking about, London, okay, that's doing very well, but if you go outside London, I still think it's, the 2017 before we're going to see, good things happening, before where I can say, hey, bright future on the horizon, okay? The good thing about all these stimulus is by stimulating new build, that creates demand in new build. You'll see new build prices will actually increase. So if you're investing in new build, off plan, that sort of stuff, and you're buying early phases, you're going to see increases in prices. So it's good news from that perspective. In fact, all over, it's a pretty good budget for an investor, okay? There's nothing too serious, there's nothing to really go, whoa, we need to be wary of that, we need to avoid that, we need to strategize that. Pretty much it's steady as she goes, and that's the sort of the budget that it is. It's nothing fancy, there's nothing sort of that goes wow, okay? So guys, have a great day, and remember, live with passion.